Thank you all very much.
Grantchester Mystery Mansion. In the Nuka World DLC for Fallout 4, you can find a haunted house attraction called the Grantchester Mystery Mansion on the outskirts of the theme park. The location centers around a story about a little girl named Lucy Grantchester, daughter of Hannibal and Morticia Grantchester. From the beginning, their lives were already troubling. Morticia almost died giving birth to Lucy, thinking she was possessed. This eventually became true though, because Lucy apparently did become possessed and murdered her parents before she was eventually committed to a mental institution. She later escaped and hanged herself in the attic on her 18th birthday. The mansion was eventually converted into a tourist attraction to capitalize on traffic from the nearby amusement park, complete with upside-down rooms and staircases leading nowhere, supposedly designed to confuse Lucy's ghost and keep her from escaping. But that's not the creepiest part of it all, because when it's time for you to explore the mansion, you'll have many encounters and brief glimpses of this little girl in pre-war clothing running through the halls. But you can't target her in VATS and has no name when you aim at her. You can chase her through various rooms, and she'll sometimes stop, allowing you to interact with her, but she never responds and only stares at you silently. If you're in the attic, she runs through a door on the back wall that leads to nowhere. What makes Lucy a true ghost is that unlike other Fallout hauntings that have scientific explanations, Lucy's ghost has no rational explanation within the game's lore. She's simply there, a genuine supernatural presence in a series that typically explains away mysteries with radiation, technology, or mutated creatures. The Interloper. Deep within the Lucky Hole mine in Fallout 76's Appalachia lies one of the franchise's most disturbing entities. The Interloper is a massive, plant-like creature with skin resembling stripped bark, with most of its biomass consisting of a tangle of branches and a pair of misshapen legs at the opposite end. Its midsection appears to be an oversized humanoid torso with several hand-like appendages protruding from its head and back. Now, you won't find many clues in the surrounding area, but there are details in the terminal entries that will show you the whole disturbing story. Before the Great War, a strange woman visited the mine asking for a tour but was promptly turned away by security, saying the place was dangerous. The woman became mad and had to be escorted out, but under breath she was muttering something. Shortly after, the mine's parent corporation ordered operations to cease permanently. The woman returned with a larger group, and soon after, people were spotted lurking around the premises at night with locks found smashed. The understaffed security team eventually fled, explicitly surrendering the mine to this unknown group. Now, the creature itself lies deep within the mine's bowels, in a foggy, irradiated chamber accessible only through hidden passages. The lair is littered with root totems and strange creepy letters talking about some creature of the woods, but then when you finally reach the area near the Interloper, you'll start to hear a choir of voices singing. Eventually, you'll reach the Interloper itself. When struck, the Interloper bleeds, proving it's somehow alive despite never moving. However, the creature never really interacts with the player. The Ugg-Qualtoth. Across the wasteland of Fallout 3 and 4, scattered references point to something that existed long before the bombs fell, something ancient. This is the Ugg-Qualtoth. It is described as an eldritch being and a forgotten god worshipped by cults in the capital wasteland and Point Lookout. Before the war, Constance Blackhall led a cult at Point Lookout, acting as priestess to the swamp folk and leading rituals she got from an ancient book called the Krivbekny. Her brother Richard Dunwich ran a mining company called Dunwich Borers, which sold mining drills to companies like Poseidon Energy. But the mining operations was just a cover for something darker. The company's poor safety record was a sign that what they were actually doing was human sacrifice at Dunwich sites. In Fallout 3's Dunwich building, you'll find an underground chamber with an obelisk dedicated to Ugg-Qualtoth. The building is filled with human corpses, and if you travel further inside, you'll hear voices whispering Alhazred in the ambient sounds, which is the game's reference to Abdul Alhazred, the mad poet in the Cthulhu mythos from H.P. Lovecraft. The same horror appears in Fallout 4 at Dunwich Borers, which on the front looks like a marble quarry. But the company wasn't mining marble at all, and was actually searching for an ancient temple buried deep underground. Workers who went down far enough experienced flashback sequences showing pre-war rituals. A man at a podium makes cutting motions at a pulpit, while 9 people kneel around him with their hands crossed behind their backs. At the bottom of a flooded shaft, you'll find a gigantic statue buried beneath the earth with a single pupilless eye staring upward. On an altar nearby rests Krem's tooth, a unique weapon flanked by 2 mini-nukes. The altar itself seems connected to the same dark rituals that the Krivbekny enabled for centuries. The book grants whoever holds it an unnaturally long life, which is exactly what kept Constance Blackhall alive for generations. And when the book was stolen, she died almost immediately. But destroying the book seems supernatural too. Press it against the Dunwich obelisk and it bursts into flames, taking every ghoul in the chamber with it. It's evidence that something ancient was already sleeping beneath the earth long before the bombs fell, and the Dunwich family spent generations digging towards it. Lorenzo Cabot and the Artifact. The Cabot family keeps one of the Commonwealth's darkest secrets locked in the basement of Parsons State Insane Asylum in the form of Lorenzo Cabot. Lorenzo was born in 1835 and became an archaeologist obsessed with theories about civilizations that existed before humanity. In 1894, he traveled to the Rub al-Khali Desert searching for the lost city of Ubar, and what he found there changed everything. Deep underground, Lorenzo discovered a structure containing non-human remains and a mysterious crown. The moment he put it on, the artifact fused directly to his nervous system and couldn't be removed without killing him. It granted him incredible abilities: telekinesis, superhuman strength, immortality that's kept him alive for over 400 years. But the crown also drove him violently insane, turning him psychotic and paranoid until his family had no choice but to lock him away in 1898. He's been trapped in that basement ever since. And here's where it gets truly disturbing. Lorenzo claims the artifact lets him communicate with the precursor civilization that created it. He's spent centuries exploring his own mind, receiving knowledge from beings beyond human comprehension. His psychic abilities are undeniable. He can release energy bursts that push people away and even deflect grenades. His son Jack discovered he could extract compounds from Lorenzo's blood to create a serum that halts aging, which is how the entire Cabot family has survived for centuries. The artifact operates on principles that completely defy known science in Fallout. It has an internal power supply that's lasted over 500 years and can only be controlled through direct neural input. Lorenzo isn't a mutant or a synth, but something else entirely, touched by forces that existed long before humanity walked the earth. The Master's psychic presence. Richard Moreau was exiled for murder and renamed himself Richard Gray. He was a doctor in the Hub when he led an expedition to investigate mutant attacks in 2102. His group discovered Mariposa military base and fought their way inside, but Gray fell into a vat of FEV where he floated for days. The extreme exposure didn't just mutate his body, but fundamentally changed what he was. Gray's mental capacity increased exponentially as he began experimenting on animals and eventually humans, building an army of super mutants. He started assimilating other minds into himself, creating a hive consciousness called the Unity. By 2162, Gray had become the Master, a biomass of dozens of humans and mutants integrated into the Cathedral's computer network. But what makes him scary or creepy is his seemingly paranormal psychic ability. FEV doesn't grant telepathy or mind control, yet the Master developed the power to penetrate mental defenses and prey on people's deepest fears. Members of his cult needed psychic nullifiers just to approach him, or his passive psychic field would cause physical damage. He created the Corridor of Revulsion, a psychic projection so vivid that people experienced it as reality. The Master spoke in multiple voices simultaneously, robotic, male, and female tones that switched mid-sentence. He knew things about people he couldn't possibly know, reading their thoughts and breaking them psychologically without ever touching them. Despite his distributed form throughout the vault, his primary consciousness remained in the central body fused with the Overseer's chair. The Ghost People. The Sierra Madre's ghost people started as ordinary construction workers before Big MT turned them into something far worse. Frederick Sinclair gave Big MT free rein to experiment at the Sierra Madre in exchange for funding and advanced technology. One experiment involved an airborne chemical so toxic it caused immediate lung and tissue damage when the ventilation system backed up. While Big MT provided hazmat suits to protect the workers, the suits themselves were untested experiments that had a fatal flaw. The clasps of the suit required another person's assistance to remove, and when workers investigated the toxic cloud, trace amounts corroded the metal locks. Accidental or not, this sealed the workers inside their suits permanently. Fast forward after the Great War, the villa's infrastructure collapsed and the cloud blanketed everything. And this long exposure morphed the trapped workers into the ghost people. Trapped in suits for 200 years without food, water, or air, these things shouldn't be alive at all, but they persist and even attack. Shooting them only makes them collapse temporarily before they twitch, make gaseous noises, and rise again. The only way to stop them permanently is to dismember them. What's even more surprising is these aren't mindless creatures at all. They're seen using bear traps to ambush unfortunate victims, emerging in larger numbers when triggered. Dean Domino has watched them for 2 centuries and can't explain what they've become, something caught between life and death in the poisoned air. The Talking Graves in the Mojave. Goodspring Cemetery sits on a hill overlooking the town, a small burial ground with 29 graves marked by wooden planks and simple crosses. Some graves are fenced off to keep animals away, and several can be excavated with a shovel to extract items from. It looks like any other wasteland cemetery, unremarkable and abandoned. But this particular hillside is where the courier's story began. In October 2281, Benny and the Great Khans dug a shallow grave here, put a bullet through the courier's skull, and buried them. But hours later, Victor the Securitron dug them back out, and against all medical logic, the courier was still breathing. They survived, and that impossible return from death opened something in the cemetery that shouldn't have been opened. Spend any time here, and ghostly whispers rise from the opened graves. Objects shift and tumble without being touched, pushed by hands that remain invisible. The longer you stay, the more you'll realize you're in the presence of something supernatural. The Mothman. Across Appalachia, sightings of a winged humanoid figure began in Point Pleasant in 1966 and never truly stopped, continuing right up until the bombs fell in 2077. The creature came to be known as the Mothman, and it quickly distinguished itself from other wasteland threats by doing something none of them could. It warned people. On October 22, 2077, Brother Charles of the Cult of the Mothman recorded visions of a catastrophic flood arriving the following day. Taking the warning seriously, his followers climbed onto the rooftops of Point Pleasant and waited for the waters to rise. No flood ever came. Instead, nuclear fire fell from the sky. The Mothman had shown him the apocalypse, only translated into a form the human mind could process. This behavior goes far beyond animal instinct or coincidence, especially when combined with what comes after. The Mothman does not merely appear, it can be summoned. At Landview Lighthouse, spreading firefly luminescence on the lamp during the Path to Enlightenment ritual causes the wise Mothman to arrive. It does not attack. It watches, allows communion, and leaves behind a blessing that grants increased experience. Yet encounters vary. Other Mothman variants are hostile on sight, and eggs found near cult shrines confirm there are multiple creatures, not just one. The Mothman foresees catastrophe and responds to ritual, and even bestows blessings. It goes beyond simple radiation effects and borders into the supernatural. Fallout 4 mannequins. Something is wrong with the mannequins in the Commonwealth, and the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to explain them away. You'll find them positioned in scenes throughout the wasteland that suggest deliberate staging. For example, in Concord Speakeasy, you'll find 3 mannequins surrounding a decapitated skeleton in a bathtub while they're holding machetes, as if they'd done the crime. Parsons State Insane Asylum is full of them. In one instance, they're circled inside a storage room as if welcoming you when you open the door. The Warren Theater has them posed mid-performance on stage, like actors frozen in time, and when you get close, you discover one of them isn't a mannequin at all but a synth that attacks you. Now these scenes are disturbing enough on their own, but go to Far Harbor and you'll find an even creepier scene. At Fringe Cove Docks, there is a sunken cargo ship sitting on the ocean floor with mannequins poking through the surface. A note on the wreckage tells you everything you need to know about what went wrong. I can't wait to drop these damn mannequins off. The crew is starting to claim that they're hearing weird noises from the cargo. Now if you dive further into the wreckage, you'll realize the cargo containers hold opened coffins, each one containing a mannequin surrounded by gold bars like some kind of offering. But it's inside the boat's interior where things become impossible to rationalize. Mannequins are carefully positioned around crew skeletons, with one standing over a body as if admiring its handiwork. They're even positioned to be staring through the windows of the sunken ship. These positions are many feet underwater, which means nobody could have staged this scene after the ship sank. The game never confirms whether they're possessed, controlled by hidden technology, or operating on principles the wasteland can't explain. But what's certain is that the crew died under mysterious and creepy circumstances. The Dunwich Building. Ronald Laren from Girder Shade has one warning for anyone heading south. Stay far away from the Dunwich Building because it's bad mojo. And he isn't wrong. Before the war, this office tower belonged to Dunwich Borers LLC, a company that made industrial rock drills. But when the bombs fell, radiation and fire swept through the place and trapped the workers inside. A terminal record actually still holds their frantic last words, as many of them were twisted into feral ghouls. 200 years later, and the building was feared and shunned. Even the most hardcore raiders and scavengers avoided it, and the few who returned from venturing inside came back a shell of the person they used to be. The deeper you go, the darker and stranger the place becomes until you reach the underchambers. There, an unnatural obelisk rises out of the stone, vines curling around it, skulls carved up its length, and the faint outline of a woman's figure half emerging from the surface. It also radiates up to 20 rads per second, while feral ghouls linger around it like worshippers. Scattered among the ruins are 9 audio logs from Jamie, an unfortunate wanderer whose recordings capture his steady descent into madness until he ultimately becomes a feral himself. And then there are the hauntings. You could hear doors groaning when they open even though no one is near, and footsteps trail behind you in empty corridors. But at the base of the obelisk, you'll hear a whisper in the darkness, repeating a single name, Al-Hazared. This place is tied to the Point Lookout DLC and the Krivbekni, a powerful book used for dark magic rituals. If the lone wanderer finds this book and decides to destroy it, they can do so by reaching the deepest chambers of the Dunwich Building and pressing it against the obelisk's altar. This will purify the building once and for all, ending its curse. Andale. If you stumble across Andale in the southern capital wasteland, it might look like a miracle. Residents dressed in pre-war clothes stroll the streets, greet visitors with old-fashioned politeness, and proudly insist this is the greatest town in Virginia.
Name's Smith, Jack Smith. Welcome to Andale, the best little town in Virginia.
They claim to still vote Republican in every election and say they're keeping the American dream alive more than 2 centuries after the bombs fell. But beneath this picture-perfect surface lies something far darker. When the Great War came, 4 families survived by hiding in fallout shelters beneath Andale. When they emerged, their food supplies were gone and starvation set in. To survive, they turned on unwary travelers, justifying cannibalism through a twisted interpretation of Christianity and family values. For 200 years, generations replaced the old through incestuous marriages, since no outsiders were ever brought in. By the 23rd century, everyone in Andale was closely related, and men simply married whoever was available without question. Outsiders soon recognized that something was wrong. Caravaneers, raiders, and travelers stayed away from the place, even if they couldn't quite name why. The evidence is hard to miss once you look closer. Refrigerators in each home hold carefully stored cuts of so-called strange meat pie, with a total of about 80 pieces across town. Andale's families had relied on cannibalism for hundreds of years, preying on unsuspecting travelers who let their guard down because of the residents' friendly manners. Once the lone wanderer discovers the truth, they can either wipe out the settlement or let them continue with their custom to keep enjoying Andale's hospitality and the occasional meat pie. The Museum of Witchcraft. Near Salem in the northeastern Commonwealth is where you'll find this place, a Gothic-style church that looks unsettling from the outside, but what waits inside is far worse, enough to send even hardened gunners running for their lives. Before the war, the building served as a historical attraction, offering exhibits on Salem's past and its infamous witch trials. Now the main door is chained shut from the inside, which forces the only entry point through the cellar. But once you get in there, you immediately find the mutilated body of Private Hart, the first sign of a gunner squad that met a violent end. Deeper inside, the basement reveals the remains of Major Jeffries and 2 more soldiers, all killed by the same unseen threat. As you explore, constant rumbles and camera shakes signal that something powerful is close by. Soon, on the main floor near the northwest bathroom, the body of Sergeant Lee lies next to several cracked deathclaw eggs. Among the broken shells is a single pristine egg that somehow survived intact, and the culprit quickly becomes clear. A leveled deathclaw has made the museum its nest. As you dig deeper into the mystery, you eventually uncover the squad's audio logs, which documented their growing panic.
Everyone inside the museum, now!
They realized they were trapped inside with the creature that was hunting them down.
Major, what found us?
Vault 11. What makes Vault 11 so disturbing isn't monsters or mutations. It's walking through a tomb of bad decisions. Every wall is plastered with campaign posters. I hate Nate. Don't vote Glover. Each one is a desperate plea to avoid being elected overseer because being elected meant execution at the end of your term. And the deeper you go, the worse it gets. Terminals document how quickly neighbors turned on each other. Audio logs capture moments of paranoia and betrayal as political blocs scheme to condemn others instead of themselves. The sacrificial chamber sits at the bottom, a room with a single chair facing a projection screen, designed to comfort victims with lies before robots gunned them down. The real horror waits at the entrance. 4 skeletons slumped near the vault door, a pistol on the floor. These were the survivors who finally refused to kill, only to learn the computer would have freed them if they'd refused from day one. 16 years of unnecessary murder with hundreds dead. The 4 people left couldn't live with this realization and decided to end it all. Only one person was able to walk away, but nobody really knows what happened to them. Sierra Madre. It was meant to be a place where guests could begin again, leaving behind their past lives to survive the nuclear war that Frederick Sinclair believed was inevitable. The resort was meant to be completely self-sufficient, and at its center was a vault where Sinclair planned to survive with Vera Keyes, the woman he loved. But the grand opening never came. Keyes, manipulated by Dean Domino, betrayed Sinclair, and when the bombs fell, the systems in Sierra Madre turned on the very people they were meant to protect. As a result, the resort became frozen in time. The systems never stopped running. Automated holograms still patrol the halls, killing anyone they mistake for intruders. Doors slam shut with no way to open them again, and vending machines hum like the casino is still waiting for its grand opening, even though the guests had been dead for centuries. Walking through it feels less like exploring ruins, and more like intruding on a place that doesn't realize it's already gone. The villa outside is even worse. The streets are filled with the cloud, a red, poisonous mist that never clears. Step into it for too long, and it eats away at your body, while shapes shuffle in the haze. These are the ghost people. Former workers trapped in hazmat suits, now mindless and violent, unable to die in any normal sense. Sinclair died with his dream inside the vault, waiting for Keyes who never came. Her voice survives only as a hologram repeating her last words, "Let go." Far Harbor. This place sits on the shores of Mount Desert Island, a settlement clinging to existence against the radioactive fog that constantly threatens to swallow the town whole. The settlement only survives because Acadia, a colony of escaped synths led by Dima, provided them with fog condensers that keep the deadly mist at bay. In exchange for this life-saving tech, Far Harbor became a lifeline to the outside world for the synths. This arrangement seemed like salvation, until the truth came to light. Desperate to create peace and protect his people, Dima murdered the town's leader and replaced her with a synth duplicate, effectively infiltrating Far Harbor's leadership without anyone knowing. The woman the residents trusted to guide them wasn't even human anymore. But the worst part in all of this is that Dima actually developed a contingency plan that could wipe out everyone in town by shutting down their power source in case his facade collapsed. The Lone Wolf Radio. South of Good Springs sits a rusted trailer that once served as a pirate broadcasting station run by a conspiracy theorist who fought what he believed was the good fight against government evils. The trailer is packed with scattered radio equipment, sensor modules, and heaps of empty whiskey bottles and shot glasses scattered across every surface. Outside, graffiti warns visitors to keep out, while inside, a far more disturbing message is painted on the wall. Everyone is gone. I am all alone. Let it all end. Before the Great War, this lone wolf railed against the government from his makeshift station, broadcasting his theories and warnings to anyone who would listen. However, the devastation of the nuclear holocaust broke him completely, and he abandoned his mission shortly after the bombs fell. Near the bed lies a copy of the Wasteland Survival Guide, which means that a new inhabitant was here at least a few years after Fallout 3's events, giving the book time to circulate from the capital wasteland to the Mojave. The radio equipment is still turned on despite being exposed to the elements for years, and the place hasn't been taken over or stripped for parts. Everything suggests someone was here recently, maybe just weeks or a couple months ago, before they simply walked away and never came back. Pickman Gallery. A row house in Boston's North End sits among buildings that date back to 1630, when the neighborhood first saw settlement. By 2287, one of these old homes became the residence of Pickman, a serial killer who hunts raiders across the Commonwealth. The building gave him access to ancient smuggling tunnels beneath the North End passages that connect to a wider network under Boston. These tunnels became his hunting grounds, allowing him to stalk targets underground and drag raiders back to his place. But if that's not bad enough, the things that he kept in his home were the stuff of nightmares. Inside, 12 paintings hang in the first room, each one created using the victim's blood as paint. Then the corpses were arranged throughout the 3 floors like sculptures. On the top floor, a weapons workbench sits beside his bed, showing that killing had become part of his daily routine. When the player finds Pickman, raiders have tracked him into the tunnels and cornered him. The player can choose to save him or kill him. Many players actually sympathize with Pickman because he only kills raiders. The Glow. It's the crater in the southeastern wasteland that glows at night with radioactive light you can see for miles across the desert. Before the war, this was West Tech Research Facility, where scientists created the forced evolutionary virus in underground labs. But when the bombs fell, multiple warheads hit the place directly and tore open the facility, shattering the FEV tanks on levels 4 and 5. This is why the radiation here is lethal. Standing on the surface of the Glow, you'll immediately notice that the entrance is just a massive hole punched into the earth, and climbing down into it plays this otherworldly droning soundtrack that makes the whole place feel suffocating and alien. On the first level, you find Sergeant Allen's body still in his power armor with a hollow disc that explains what happened to his squad. They made it to the 3rd level before automated turrets cut through their armor and tore them apart. The survivors dragged themselves back up, but one guy wandered off mumbling about hell and took all their anti-radiation meds with him. The rest died slowly from radiation poisoning. At the facility's center, the Zax supercomputer is still running with most of its sensors destroyed, trying endlessly to complete lab checks it physically can't do anymore. The Glow has become the Brotherhood's test for outsiders who want to join, a quest they know will probably kill you. Harold. His story is one of the most tragic in the entire Fallout series, and his possible death might be even more devastating. After being exposed to FEV at Mariposa, Harold spent over 200 years wandering the wasteland with a tree named Bob growing from his head. By 2277, Bob had completely taken over, rooting Harold to the ground in the capital wasteland and transforming him into a massive tree that an entire cult, the Tree Minders, worshipped as a god. Harold was conscious through all of it and he couldn't take it anymore. So when the Lone Wanderer finally reaches Oasis and gains access to Harold, he begs them to end his suffering. You see, the Tree Minders would never do the deed because they saw Harold's pleas as tests of faith rather than genuine cries for help. And so here's where it gets truly horrific. One of the options the player has is to set Harold on fire using a torch and his own highly flammable sap. This is explicitly the most painful way to kill him, and Harold makes that pretty clear. But if you continue to go this route, the flames consume him slowly as he screams in agony, his wooden body burning while he's still fully aware of everything that's happening. And unfortunately, it's not a quick death either. The audio of his death is genuinely disturbing, filled with recognizable screams of pain that make it clear this was an evil choice. Father Elijah. This man was once a genius scribe who rose to become an elder of the Brotherhood of Steel, a rare honor for someone who wasn't a paladin. But his brilliance was matched by his obsession with technology and his complete disregard for human life when it got in the way of his goals. After abandoning his chapter at Helios 1, Elijah searched the wasteland for old world tech to gain ultimate power. His journey eventually brought him to the Sierra Madre, a pre-war casino surrounded by toxic clouds and guarded by holograms. Elijah saw the Sierra Madre as the key to everything he wanted: invincible holograms, explosive collars, and limitless supplies, and planned to use its cloud to wipe out the NCR and the Mojave before rebuilding civilization under his absolute control. To get into the casino's vault, Elijah forced others to do his dirty work, using explosive collars to coerce them into unlocking the Sierra Madre's secrets. But when the courier finally reaches the vault with Elijah's guidance, they have the option to turn the tables on him completely. By sneaking past Elijah and escaping the vault, the courier can trap the evil old man inside the very treasure room he'd been obsessed with for so long. And when the vault door seals shut with Elijah inside, there's no way out anymore. He's surrounded by all the gold bars and pre-war wealth he wanted, but none of it matters now. The Overseer of Vault 13. This man was the dedicated leader who genuinely cared about his community, even if his commitment to keeping the vault sealed made him seem strict and overbearing. When the water chip failed and the vault's survival was threatened, he had no choice but to send someone into the wasteland to find a replacement. That person became the Vault Dweller, and their journey would eventually lead to the discovery of the Master's super mutant army. But there's a dark path in Fallout 1 where everything goes horribly wrong. If the Vault Dweller gets captured by the super mutants and breaks under torture, they can give up the location of Vault 13. This condemns everyone they ever knew to a brutal death. The super mutants launch an invasion of the vault, breaching the entrance and flooding through the corridors in a massacre that's shown in genuinely disturbing footage from the game. And while the Overseer makes his final stand in a defensive turret, the super mutants eventually overwhelm him. A super mutant jumps onto the turret and punches him directly in the face with enough force to stun him. More mutants pile on, ripping him out of his defensive position. They proceed to tear him apart and conquer the very vault he'd spent his entire life protecting. Ellen Santiago. She was one of the few genuinely good people in the Enclave, which only made her fate all the more tragic. She'd been a colonel leading a military unit in Washington, D.C. when the bombs dropped, and somehow managed to guide her soldiers all the way to the White Spring Bunker in Appalachia, with minimal casualties. When they reached the location, Secretary Thomas Eckhart welcomed her with open arms, promising revenge against the communists, and giving her a command position in his growing Enclave force. For a while, Santiago went along with Eckhart's plans, but eventually, she couldn't keep turning a blind eye to the situation. She finally confronted Eckhart in July 2084 and threatened to leave with her soldiers, but he didn't argue or try to reason with her. Instead, he knocked her out with gas and put her in an artificially induced coma, keeping her sedated for 2 years while he needed her command codes. Santiago remained unconscious until June 2086, when loyalists staged a revolt against Eckhart and revived her to lead the uprising. She gladly took command, and they managed to arrest Eckhart and take control of the bunker. But Santiago made a fatal mistake when she decided to destroy Modus, the AI controlling the facility. Modus retaliated immediately after the damage to its systems, and an explosion tore through the weapons lab where Santiago was standing. The blast killed her instantly, but it also ruptured a toxin tank that leaked into the bunker's air circulation system. The survivors were left in complete darkness as the toxic gas spread through the sealed facility. Everyone who had fought to stop Eckhart's madness died slowly in the dark, poisoned by the very base they'd tried to liberate. Santiago had been kept prisoner in the bunker for years, finally woke up and led a successful revolt, only to be killed along with everyone who trusted her in the immediate aftermath of their victory. Frank Horrigan. He was the single most dangerous enemy in the entire Fallout series, a super mutant sealed inside custom power armor and enhanced with so many cybernetic implants that he was barely human anymore. He'd started as an Enclave Secret Service agent and the President's bodyguard before a mission to Mariposa military base exposed him to FEV. The Enclave decided to experiment on him for 2 years, operating on his mutating body and testing modified FEV strains until they created a one-of-a-kind killing machine. Horrigan was faster, stronger, and more brutal than any other super mutant, and his armor constantly injected him with drugs just to keep him alive. He was deployed across the wasteland as the Enclave's solution to any problem, and the way he killed people gave nightmares to the soldiers who accompanied him. By the time the Chosen One invaded the Enclave oil rig in 2242, Horrigan was standing guard at the exit, personally ensuring that nobody would escape after the reactor meltdown was triggered. The fight against him is absolutely brutal, and even after taking enough damage to kill anyone else several times over, Horrigan refuses to stay down. When he's finally defeated, the Chosen One can watch as Horrigan is literally cut in half at the waist. His lower body is completely separated, but somehow he's still alive and conscious. Horrigan drags himself up on his hands and taunts the Chosen One one last time, telling them they've accomplished nothing and that the self-destruct has been triggered. He starts reciting his oath to the President and the Enclave, duty, honor, courage, semper fi, before the internal pressure from his damaged systems causes his head to explode. James. a brilliant scientist who spent his life trying to bring clean water to the capital wasteland. James's death is one of the most heartbreaking losses. He was working at the Jefferson Memorial with his wife Catherine and a team of fellow scientists when Catherine went into labor and gave birth to the lone wanderer. Unfortunately, Catherine died from complications during childbirth, and James abandoned the project to flee to Vault 101 to keep his child safe. For nearly 20 years, he served as the vault's physician while raising his child, but the dream of finishing Project Purity never left him. In 2277, James eventually made the difficult decision to escape the vault and return to the wasteland to finally complete the project. With the lone wanderer's help and the recruitment of Dr. Madison Lee, James managed to get the project running again. They were so close to success when the Enclave arrived in force. Colonel Autumn stormed into the activation room with his soldiers and demanded that James hand over all research and make the purifier operational for the Enclave immediately. James tried to explain that the facility wasn't operational, but Autumn executed one of the scientists, Janice, right in front of everyone and repeated his demand. It dawned on James, Autumn wasn't planning on letting any of them leave alive, so instead of surrendering, he triggered a radiation leak in the control room, flooding it with lethal doses in a desperate attempt to kill Autumn and stop the Enclave. Unfortunately, Autumn managed to inject himself in the nick of time with an anti-radiation serum and survived. James collapsed as the radiation tore through his body, using his last words to tell his child to run before dying right there in the control room. James had finally returned to finish the project his wife had died for, had brought his child into it despite the danger, and his sacrifice didn't even accomplish what he'd intended. He died in agony from radiation poisoning, watching his life's work get stolen by the Enclave while his child barely escaped. Mr. House. The smartest man in the Fallout universe, Robert House was a pre-war genius who had founded Robco Industries. He had amassed billions of dollars before correctly predicting that nuclear war was inevitable. He then spent a fortune preparing Las Vegas to survive the apocalypse, creating an army of Securitrons and a defense system to shoot down incoming missiles. When the Great War did finally come, House sealed himself inside a life support chamber that kept his body alive while his brain was wired into his vast computer network. For over 200 years, he worked to restore Vegas to its former glory, eventually emerging to unite the three families and establish the new Vegas Strip as a major power in the Mojave. House's physical body was incredibly fragile after spending centuries in the sterile environment of his life support chamber, and he'd specifically designed his security to ensure nobody could ever reach him. But the courier can fight through the Lucky 38, bypass the Securitrons, and make it down to House's sealed chamber. When they open it up, they find House's actual body, a withered, mummified husk that's barely alive outside the chamber's sterile environment. The moment House is exposed to the outside air, he starts being contaminated by bacteria that his immune system can't fight off. If the courier chooses to put him back into the chamber instead of killing him outright, they condemn House to the one death he'd specifically begged them not to inflict. House knows exactly what's about to happen because the chamber is no longer sterile. The bacteria on his body will multiply in the life support system, and he'll slowly decay from the inside while still conscious and aware. It's a long, agonizing deterioration until death. Of all the ways the courier could end House's life, this is the cruelest, and House's final words make it clear he understands exactly what kind of death awaits him. Lorenzo Cabot. This man was an archaeologist born in 1835 who made a discovery that changed his life forever and doomed his entire family. During an expedition to the Rub al-Khali Desert in 1894, he uncovered an ancient alien artifact, a mysterious crown that granted him incredible powers but also drove him completely insane. The crown couldn't be removed without killing him, and it gave Lorenzo telekinetic abilities, super strength, and immortality. It also made him violent, paranoid, and dangerous to everyone around him. So on July 1898, they confined Lorenzo in the basement of Parsons State Insane Asylum, where he remained imprisoned for the next 400 years. Lorenzo's son Jack studied the artifact and used compounds from his father's blood to create a serum that stopped aging, allowing the entire Cabot family to survive for centuries. They were essentially vampires, feeding off Lorenzo to prolong their own lives, and Lorenzo knew it. When the sole survivor gets involved in the Cabot family's secrets, they're forced to make a choice. They can side with Jack and kill Lorenzo in his cell, or they can release Lorenzo and let him take his revenge. If they choose to kill Lorenzo while he's still imprisoned, one of the methods available is using radiation to execute him. This is particularly cruel because Lorenzo had survived for over 400 years, had endured centuries of confinement, and his reward is to be killed like a lab rat while still locked in the cell his family had built for him. The radiation death isn't quick either. Lorenzo would feel himself dying from the inside as the radiation poisoning spreads through his system, all while knowing that his family gets to keep living off the serum they'd stolen from his blood. Feral ghouls. These were once normal people who absorbed too much radiation. While regular ghouls can live for centuries thanks to their bodies being healed by radiation, their brains don't get the same protection. Instead, radiation slowly destroys their mental capacity until they lose everything that made them human. In addition to that, the wickedness of becoming a feral ghoul is that the transformation doesn't happen overnight. Before the transformation is complete, ghouls start wandering aimlessly, suffering from seizures, and repeatedly muttering their own names. But once they fully turn, there's no coming back. The process is irreversible, and they become driven purely by instinct. Feral ghouls will attack anyone on sight, including former friends, family, and even pets. The only thing they won't attack is other ghouls, likely because ferals can't detect each other through body temperature and radiation levels. That's because these creatures have a disturbing biology. They produce no body heat and emit lethal levels of radiation continuously, essentially making them animated corpses that need nothing but radiation to keep moving. Because of this, they cluster around radiation sources and hibernate for long periods, only waking when disturbed or when they need to find more radiation. Some eventually absorb so much that they become the glowing ones. However, not all ghouls turn feral, like Jason Bright, who's managed to remain articulate and thoughtful. Being social, staying driven, having the right genetics, and avoiding excessive radiation can delay this horrible process. Floaters. The product of twisted FEV experiments, these creatures are as disgusting as they sound. Born from the master's horrific virus testing, floaters are large, soft-bodied invertebrates that hover in the air using flotation sacs filled with noxious, flammable gases. The disturbing part starts with their appearance. A giant disc-like head that's mostly mouth, surrounded by sharp teeth that can open radially like some kind of organic nightmare. And then there's the creature's funnel-shaped mouth. A long tentacle shoots out from it, ending in a cross-shaped mouth that twists through the air to grab targets. It's like something from John Carpenter's The Thing. To make things worse, despite their awkward appearance, floaters are actually remarkably fast. They use their flexible bodies to slither and propel themselves along the ground with help from those flotation sacs. But there are key differences between floaters because of the variants that exist, like the Appalachian ones that look different and instead literally float in the air. But whether it's the West Coast version or the Appalachian variant, all floaters share the same nightmarish presence when they're attacking you. Trogs. Similar to feral ghouls, but somehow worse, these mutated humans are native to the pit area. What sets them apart is their origin. They're not created by radiation alone, but by the troglodyte degeneration contagion, a disease endemic to the town. This means approximately 20% of the pit's population are likely to transform into these feral monstrosities. But what's particularly disturbing here is the transformation process. Studies have shown that children born in TDC-active areas have virtually a 100% degeneration rate and become feral within weeks of birth. Imagine giving birth only to watch your newborn rapidly deteriorate into a mindless creature. The severely impacted mental state caused by the contagion will cause them to attack their friends and family without mercy, with no recognition of who they once were. When you encounter them, they're faster and more dangerous than feral ghouls. They literally jump around and will hit you incredibly hard, but they also have a ranged attack where they're spitting deadly bile at you. Like many of the creatures in Fallout, trogs have variants as well. Trog fledglings, for example, are younger and smaller versions of the regular trog, but are still stronger than normal humans. Meanwhile, trog devourers are the tanks of the group. They're capable of incomprehensible speech and a disorienting howl they use to attack or flee. But no matter which variant you encounter, you can be sure these creatures are going to attack in packs, overwhelming you through sheer numbers. Centaurs. Everyone thinks of these when discussing Fallout's most disturbing creatures, and for good reason. Created from experimentation with the forced evolutionary virus, these mutant chimeras were born from one of the Master's most horrifying practices, tossing a varied mix of different animals, including humans, dogs, and cats, into FEV vats to see what emerged. The resulting abominations differ radically in appearance, but all are nightmare fuel. Two-headed variants have both a canine and humanoid head mounted on thick, lengthy necks. The canine head can be seen biting at the human head, which evades, suggesting some level of individual thought trapped inside this monster. Meanwhile, there's the one-headed variant that's basically a humanoid torso that sits upright with multiple legs. Jagged bones sprout from the spine and abdomen, while a single human head wears a pained expression. It's something straight out of a body horror movie. Y-17 Trauma Override Harness. Walking skeletons clad in red rubber suits with spherical glass helmets. That's what you're fighting against when you encounter these things, but the more you know about them, the more disturbing they become. These unique creatures, if you could even call them that, were created at Big MT's Y-17 medical facility. The signature full body suits they wore were designed to automatically retrieve injured soldiers and return them to base by taking over their motor functions. It seemed like a good idea in concept, until one small problem appeared. The harness itself was unable to determine whether the occupant had already expired and would continue to function normally. And although scientists scientists considered this a feature for autonomous corpse retrieval, the lack of a designated home base meant that these suits entered an unpredictable and aggressive wandering state. And so it became the perfect storm for a disturbing, berserking creature that would attack anyone on sight. But that's not the most horrifying part of it, because before it became the menace that it was, soldiers and researchers who were trapped inside actually had no ability to shut the suits down. Instead, they were forced to suffer slow, agonizing deaths, essentially locked in mobile coffins. And so even after 2 centuries, these suits continued to function, carrying the rattling bones of their original wearers as they attacked any intruders. Snallygaster. These quadrupedal creatures have no proper face, just a mouth with a long tentacle-like tongue covered in acid and multiple eyes along its back. Snallygasters are the result of successful FEV experimentation at West Tech's Appalachia Research Center, representing what happens when evil scientists are given free rein to do as they please. The creature is straight-up nightmare fuel. It has at least 40 eyes scattered across its body, 2 rows of teeth, thorns on its back, and that impossibly long tongue it uses like a whip. The creature has 2 arms with 3 claws each, plus 2 small limbs on the back it uses to support itself. But it's the tongue that's also dangerous. Up close, it whips you with this acid-covered appendage, and while at range, spits balls of toxic slime that deal poison damage. The scientists who created it described the results as disturbing, even by their standards, but they considered it a major accomplishment because the subject was living, stable, and sustaining itself normally. They even planned to release it in Huntersville, but a miscalculation caused it to escape its containment in 2078. The creature eventually procreated, which led to snallygasters spreading across Appalachia. They're easily recognizable from a distance due to their signature clicking sounds and the thick, pungent odor they emit. Swamp folk. The locals of Point Lookout were already isolated and hostile before the bombs fell, but after centuries of radiation and inbreeding, they've become something far worse. Their bodies have become severely deformed with misshapen heads and twisted limbs, but the real horror lies in what they do. Before the war, a woman named Constance Blackhall led a cult in Point Lookout. She used a book called the Krivbekni to teach the locals rituals tied to a mysterious evil entity called Ugqualtoth. The cult would torture people to death at ritual sites, chanting and sacrificing victims in bloody ceremonies. But after the bombs dropped and Constance died, the swamp folk kept the book and continued the rituals through generations, still performing the same bloody practices today, even though they have no idea what these meant anymore. Evidence of their religion is everywhere in the swamps. Totems built from roots hold teddy bears, mannequin heads, and human bones. Cloth dolls shaped like little girls hang in clusters from the trees. At their main ritual chamber, an altar displays mutilated body parts next to the Krivbekni and a meat-covered skull. Despite their mutations, though, they're still capable of complex thinking. They craft weapons, set traps, and coordinate attacks, screaming and rushing at outsiders who were naive enough to walk in their territory. Ghost people. Unique to the Sierra Madre, these aren't actually ghosts, but people trapped inside experimental hazmat suits. Big MT supplied these suits to protect construction workers from a toxic chemical cloud that filled the villa, but the suits had a fatal flaw. Once you put them on, you couldn't get them off without help from another person. And when the Great War hit and the villa's infrastructure collapsed, the cloud blanketed everything. During this time, workers put on the suits to survive, but the cloud's corrosive properties rusted the locks and trapped the people inside forever. And for over 2 centuries, the cloud transformed the people inside into something inhuman. Part of the reason why these creatures are extremely hard to kill. Gunshots and stab wounds that would kill normal humans just knock them down temporarily. Minutes later, they would start twitching and then get back up and continue attacking. The only way to stop them permanently is to dismember them, blow them apart, or disintegrate them completely. However, despite their mutation, ghost people aren't completely mindless like feral ghouls. They actually have the capability to use weapons like knives and bear traps as gauntlets. They can set elaborate ambushes and lay bait to lure victims into traps. You'll know when you're encountering ghost people for the first time. They move in an unnatural, shambling manner, ready to terrify and attack anything that moves. Robo-brain conversion. General Atomics and the US Army needed a robot that could actually think, and their solution was to just, well, use a real human brain, which is kind of like solving the deficiencies of a self-driving car by hiring a self-driving car driver. So they pulled candidates from military and civilian prisons, adults who were smart enough and physically healthy enough to survive the procedure. So if you can recite the alphabet backwards, you're gonna get pulled out. After that, you get strapped into a machine that detaches every connection between your spinal cord and the rest of your body, cracks the case, and pops the brain out before dropping it into a jar of biomedical gel. This is all done while you're still alive, by the way. Technicians then flush your memory centers and run your brain through the code conditioning protocol, which is basically designed to delete you, your personality, your memories, everything that made you a person. And if your brain resists the wipe like a Windows file, refusing to go to the recycle bin, well, they just terminate you. But if the procedure is successful, then you've got yourself a job as a robo-brain, running security patrols or mopping floors in some military base for the next 200 years with zero recollection of who you used to be. Unfortunately, that clean wipe wasn't permanent to some, because without regular maintenance, maintenance, RoboBrains actually started developing personalities again, and they always came back with a vengeance. Now, as horrible as it sounds, you wouldn't think anyone would volunteer for this, right? Wrong. A group of pre-war millionaires at Vault 118 actually enlisted for this, hoping to cheat death by putting their minds into RoboBrain bodies. I mean, it couldn't be that bad, right? It's not like rich people have ever volunteered to go 3,800 meters deep into the bottom of the ocean and look at an antique shipwreck from inside a soda can that's operated with a game controller. Now, of course, the procedure worked until it didn't. Delusions kicked in, the repetitive behavior started, and their grip on reality eventually fell apart. And that was the premium version of the procedure too, because for everyone else, this was just a prison sentence that ended with getting strapped onto a table. This one's low on the list because at least the white means most people don't have to be conscious for the centuries of floor mopping that follow. Becoming a feral ghoul. Most mutations in the Fallout universe happen to you all at once. One bad day, and you're something else. But this one's completely different. It's a slow, quiet rot of your brain that can take many, many years to finish you off. And the entire time, you're watching yourself disappear. But enough about doom scrolling, because that's actually what happens when you go feral. See, ghouls aren't automatically feral. Plenty of them keep their minds intact and live relatively normal lives, just with significantly worse skin and an extended lifespan that they didn't really ask for. But every ghoul knows what's waiting for them at the end of the road. The higher brain functions start to go first. Memory, reasoning, speech, and what replaces them is just raw aggression and hunger. And the worst part is nobody fully understands what triggers it. Isolation and lack of purpose might speed it up. Radiation exposure might be a factor, but there's no test you can take and no warning that says, hey, you've got 6 months left of being you. One day you're having a conversation, and sometime later you're a screeching, emaciated husk charging at anything that moves, including people you used to know. Your friends, your family, you'll attack them without a second of hesitation because there's nothing left in you that recognizes them. And you don't die. Feral ghouls have no body heat, emit lethal radiation, and can survive for centuries, running on nothing but the energy from that radiation alone. And it's seriously a miserable existence. I mean, at that point, what's left for you to live for besides being an extra on the set of Walking Dead? And the process is completely irreversible. It sits at number 7 because at least there's a long stretch where you get to be yourself before the lights go out. Infected by the troglodyte degeneration contagion. The Pit is what's left of Pittsburgh. It is one of the most toxic places in the entire wasteland, and it comes with its own signature way of ruining your life. It's called the Troglodyte Degeneration Contagion, or TDC, and you don't catch it from another person. You catch it from the city itself. The combination of intense ambient radiation and whatever industrial filth has been baking into the air, water, and soil for 200 years means that just being in the pit is enough to start the process. First, you get skin lesions just from breathing the air for a few weeks. Then about 20% of adults start losing their higher reasoning until the full degeneration happens. If this happens to you, then you stop being a person altogether and become a trog, a light-fearing, hungry mutant that hides in the dark and attacks anything unless it's another trog. But that's the thing, nobody has ever come back from full trog transformation. There are rumors that trogs might still recognize the faces of people they used to love, but the real gut punch is what happens to children born in the pit. According to Dr. Sandra Kundanika from the pit, nearly 100% of them degenerate into trogs within weeks of being born. One baby, Marie, was born with a natural immunity, and the raider Lord Asher was trying to use her to develop a cure, but she's the only documented case. This one edges above feral ghouls because there's no long grace period. Trapped forever in a Y-17 trauma override harness. The Y-17 trauma harness was designed to save your life, and it does. Except there's one problem. Built at the Y-17 medical facility in Big Montana, the suit was supposed to detect when a soldier was critically injured, take over their motor functions, and walk them back to base for treatment. The artificial muscle and fiber network inside the suit would move your body for you, and it could even learn new behaviors by recording your movements, including combat reflexes. In theory, it's a super solid idea. In practice, the harness had a fairly significant design flaw. It couldn't tell whether you were just unconscious or expired, and if no home base was programmed into the suit, it would just enter an unpredictable wander state and start walking wherever it wanted, with your body still inside it. The researchers at Big MT looked at this and decided it was actually a feature, since autonomous body retrieval would be useful on the battlefield, which is the kind of optimism you can only get from someone who's never been inside one of these things. And so when the Great War hit and everything went sideways, soldiers and scientists died inside their suits, triggered the wander state, and the harnesses just kept going, walking around Big MT, attacking anything they encountered using the combat behaviors they'd recorded from their now deceased wearers. 200 years later, those suits are still walking around with the rattling skeletons of their original occupants inside them. But the people who expired quickly were the lucky ones. The ones who were alive when the suit took over had no way to shut it down, no way to get out, and no way to call for help. They were trapped inside, fully conscious, while the suit walked them around against their will until they slowly faded due to dehydration, starvation, or injury, and then the suit just kept walking. Being assigned to a terrible vault. Out of the 122 vaults that Vault-Tec built, only 17 of them actually worked the way they were supposed to. The rest were secret social experiments run in collaboration with the Enclave, designed to test everything from psychological manipulation to resource denial to just straight up seeing what happens when you lock people in a box and change one horrible variable. Residents had no idea. They walked in thinking they were being saved from nuclear fire, and most of them ended up in something worse. Vault 75 ran a eugenics program on some of its most vulnerable residents. Vault 108 produced nothing but clones of a guy named Gary, dozens of them, all named Gary, all eventually hostile. Vault 87 pumped FEV into its residents and turned them into failed experiments, and those aren't even the worst ones. Vault 11 told its residents that someone had to die every year or the computer would kill everyone, so they turned elections into a death sentence, with neighbors blackmailing, coercing, and campaigning to make sure someone else's name ended up on the ballot instead of theirs. By 2093, only 5 people were left. They finally refused to nominate anyone, and Vault-Tec revealed the whole thing had been fake. Nobody ever needed to die. 4 of the 5 survivors unalived themselves on the spot. And then there's Vault 112, where the suffering wasn't even physical. Your body just sat in a lounger for 200 years, while your mind was trapped in a virtual reality simulation controlled by a man who'd gone completely insane. Overseer Braun could kill you however he wanted, wipe your memory, bring you back, and start over. And he did this for centuries, while role-playing as a little girl named Betty, which is totally not weird at all for an old man. You couldn't recognize a pattern because your memory got wiped every time. You couldn't fight back because he controlled reality itself. The worst part about any of these vaults isn't the specific experiment. It's that you'd never know which kind you were walking into until the door sealed behind you. Get captured by the Legion as a woman. Caesar's Legion has a very specific philosophy when it comes to women, and that philosophy is that you exist to produce more legionaries and carry heavy things up hills until you can't anymore. That's it. That's the whole job description. When the Legion raids a tribe or a settlement, captured women are immediately classified as property. You get stripped of your name, your identity, and whatever life you had before, and you get assigned a new Legion-approved name, because apparently even your name belongs to them now. You wear rags marked with a red X and a collar designed to chafe so you never forget what you are. Siri, an aspiring doctor who got captured from a settlement in New Mexico, now provides basic herbal remedies at the fort because the Legion forbids actual medicine. According to her, if you're too young or too old, the men usually leave you alone. Usually. Women of a certain age are officially classified as producers. Caesar or a legate personally pairs them with male soldiers to meet population quotas, and the moment a child is born, it gets taken away and raised in Legion indoctrination. No family bonds allowed. Even pregnant women get used as well. When Carla Boone and her child were sold to the Legion, they went for over 1,500 caps. Now, escaping the situation is practically impossible, because any attempt to do so, and you get thrown into the arena or get put up on a wooden cross, and there's no retirement plan either. Older women past breeding age just get worked until they drop. Becoming a centaur. If you're going to get exposed to the forced evolutionary virus, you should be praying that you come out a super mutant because there are many alternative paths, and this one's the worst. Centaurs are what happen when someone throws multiple creatures into the same vat at once. Humans, dogs, cats, little lamplighters, whatever's available really, and lets the virus fuse them all together at the genetic level. This wasn't an accident either. The Master did this deliberately at the Mariposa military base to create guard dogs for his army, and the result is one of the most grotesque things in the entire franchise. You come out as a bear-sized blob of fused flesh dragging itself along the ground on 4 to 6 arm-like limbs, with tentacles where tentacles should definitely not be, tumors everywhere, and, on the West Coast variants, 2 heads, 1 human and 1 dog that are both individually aware and apparently hate each other. The East Coast versions only get 1 head, but it's permanently frozen in the expression of a man who just watched his girl leave with Tyrone. You can't speak, you can't think beyond basic survival instincts, and whatever was left of your identity got dissolved in the vat along with the dog that's now attached to your neck. Super mutants keep you around as a glorified alarm system. Wastelanders hunt you as an abomination. And in Fallout 2, people in the den literally sell you as food. Centaur chops, which is a menu item that would probably violate several Geneva Conventions. No faction saves you, no cure exists, and even the Master himself considered centaurs to be failed experiments. Captured by raiders. Every other entry on this list has some kind of structure to it. A procedure, a virus, a system, even a twisted ideology. Unfortunately, raiders don't have any of that. They're just bored, violent, chem-addled people who captured you because you were there, and what happens next depends entirely on whatever sounds fun to them in the moment. That's what makes this the worst fate on the list, the complete randomness of it. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time, captured by the most morally reprehensible people in the wasteland. Torment is the default. Raider camps across every game in the series are littered with wastelanders and even fellow raiders, displayed as decoration or left in piles as a warning to nobody in particular. Methods they use are incredibly disturbing, not because they're trying to get information out of you, but because it's Tuesday and the chems are starting to wear off. If you're not being tormented, you're being sold. Raiders regularly trade captives to enslavers at places like Paradise Falls, or just keep them as personal property for labor, entertainment, or worse. In Nuka World, the Disciples, one of 3 raider gangs running the park, exist for the sole purpose of tormenting and terminating people for fun. However, some groups skip all of that and just eat you. The Gourmands in Appalachia turned to munching on people so aggressively that some of their own members mutated into Wendigos, a creature that eats people. But if you want the absolute worst case scenario, then you ought to get captured by the Fiends. They're a massive raider gang in the Mojave that took over Vault 3 after the residents made the mistake of opening the door and trying to be friendly. The Fiends basically smoked everyone inside and turned the vault into a den that makes every other raider camp in the series look civilized. Their sub-leader Cook is one of the most vile characters in the franchise, a sadistic predator who buys people from West Side cellars and who once forced some unlucky few to watch someone be lit up in flames. Oof. Sign me up for the Unity because what the heck, man. And because Fiends are perpetually blitzed on every chem imaginable, Jet, Psycho, whatever they can get their hands on, there's zero predictability to anything they do. Every other horrible fate on this list at least follows a set of rules. Raiders don't have rules. They have chems and free time, and you're just something to do until both run out. Randall Dean Clark. Clark's story is one of the most interesting and tragic in the game. It's spread across 5 caves in Zion Canyon, each one with a terminal inside and a journal entry dated a different year. You can find them by moving through the map, and slowly a portrait assembles itself entry after entry. The first one is from 2077. You see, Clark was a former army serviceman with a habit of running off to the wilderness for days at a time, and his wife hated it. But on this day, Clark was an hour from home, taking the scenic route back along State Route 77 when suddenly the bombs dropped. Salt Lake City was gone in an instant, along with his wife and son who were still in the city. The only reason he was still alive was because he'd been out camping. Now Clark wanted to walk straight into the radiation zone to find out if there was a slim chance his wife and son were still alive, but for some reason he didn't, and he walked to Zion Canyon instead, a decision that seemed to follow him for the rest of his life. In his escape, he made it to Fallen Rock Cave and stayed for months, at one point mopping condensation off the walls just to have water, because the radiation outside lasted far longer than his army training said it would. By 2083, he had established camps across the canyon, and we get a glimpse of how he started to thrive. Eventually, Zion started drawing survivors, and a group of Spanish-speaking survivors passed through. Clark watched over them from the shadows without ever revealing himself, stepping in quietly when they needed help and disappearing before anyone could see who'd done it. They thought it was divine intervention when medicine appeared for one of their injured. Then in early 2096, Vault 22 dwellers arrived, over 100 of them, driven out of their vault by a fungal parasite. They hit the Mexican survivor camp on February 11th, killed all the men, and penned the women and children. Clark surveyed the area for 2 days planning a rescue, then went in and found out they'd already eaten everyone they'd taken. Something broke inside him after that. So much so that he spent the next 10 months waging a methodical guerrilla war against them. Ambushes, booby traps, deadfalls, killing 24 of them before the survivors finally fled the canyon. And maybe it was good karma, but after that came 3 good years with a woman named Sylvie, a Vault 22 defector who stumbled into one of his bear traps. The two eventually got together and were expecting a child. The pregnancy prompted Clark to travel to Tokerville and gather every medical book and piece of equipment he could find. 9 months of studying, preparing, determined not to fail a family the second time. Unfortunately, the birth was a breech delivery he couldn't correct, and the cesarean section he performed came too late to save either of them. Oh man, the writers really cooked with this one. Clark buried Sylvie and the baby south of the Zion Narrows, and for the second time, he lost his family. He went back to his cave and made a decision to basically depart from this life, but ultimately didn't go through with it. He lived for a couple more years because his last terminal entry was from 2123. 24 children had appeared in the canyon, escapees from somewhere they called the school, fleeing someone they called the principal. Clark never showed himself to them either. He left gifts, storybooks, weapon manuals, medical books, and notes telling them that Zion was their reward, that they should be kind, but strike back hard when struck. He became a myth they called the Father. At the far end of the canyon, you find his skeleton at the Red Gate. He walked there in January 2124, knowing the cold would finish him before the cancer did, which he found out too late, and recorded his final thoughts under the stars. He wrote that what kept driving him forward through everything was his memories of his family, that with them gone, their only life left was inside him, and that was reason enough to keep going. The children he watched over became the Sorrows tribe, and worshipped him as a deity for generations, never knowing he was just a man who fought his demons alone and won. The Fenn Street Phantom. Somewhere underneath Boston, a serial killer left a trail for a detective he'd never met in person. The Fenn Street sewer isn't something you stumble into by accident. You find a manhole north of Diamond City, drop in, and immediately understand that someone has been treating this place like a home. Skeletons are posed and displayed throughout the tunnels, each one accompanied by chalk X marks on the wall indicating the body count. At least 24 people ended up down here. What makes it unsettling isn't the bodies. That's honestly commonplace in the post-war world. It's the tapes. The Phantom left a series of holotapes addressed to Dear Detective, a woman who had apparently gotten close enough to his trail that he decided to make a game of it, guiding her through the sewer room by room, letting her get to know him. In the recordings, he comes across as someone genuinely frustrated with the surface world, the way people smile at each other without meaning it, the exhausting performance of everyday life. Down here, he says, he gets to be himself. The detective followed the tapes all the way through, and well, she didn't make it out. You find her remains at the end, which means at some point the game stops being about a killer leaving clues and starts being about a killer who knew exactly where those clues were leading. Unfortunately, there's really no resolution to this story. Nobody knows what happened to the Phantom in the end. Vera Keyes and Frederick Sinclair. I don't know about you, but New Vegas has some of the strongest writing in the Fallout games, or maybe of all games ever, and this story just proves it. The Sierra Madre Casino was actually built for one person. Frederick Sinclair was a wealthy businessman who fell completely in love with a pre-war Hollywood starlet named Vera Keyes, and so he built an entire resort in the Mojave as a monument to her, designed to keep her safe from the war he could already see coming. And he couldn't have made his love more obvious. Her voice is literally the key to the vault beneath it. The words, "begin again" and "let go," spoken into a specific terminal in her voice, would open the elevator down. What Sinclair didn't know when he started building was that the whole thing had been arranged. Dean Domino, a lounge singer and Vera's former partner, had introduced the two of them deliberately. He'd seen Sinclair's interest and used it, with Vera's reluctant help, to set up what was supposed to be the biggest heist in history. Get inside the Sierra Madre on opening night, use her voice to open the vault, take everything, and leave Sinclair in the dust. What Domino didn't count on was that Vera would eventually confess, though the truth is, Sinclair had already known about the plot for some time before she did. He'd just been bearing it. The confession itself was what finally broke him, and he had the vault redesigned into a trap specifically for Domino. A room you could enter but never leave, so he'd have an eternity to think about what he'd done. Vera wasn't going to be spared either, at least not at first. But then she told him about the blackmail, that Domino had been coercing her with evidence of her chem's use and personal history, that she had been blackmailed. Her genuine remorse was enough to make Sinclair change his mind. He went back into the vault's infrastructure to undo the trap, crawling through the pipes to access the electronics directly. But unfortunately, the toxic leak in the ventilation killed him before he finished. When you play Dead Money, you find both of them exactly where they ended up. Vera's skeleton is in her suite, still wearing her gala dress, with the word "let go" written on the wall beside her. She'd been trapped inside the casino when its security systems activated on opening night, couldn't get out, and made the decision the only way she could. Sinclair's remains are in the pipes below the vault, next to a duffel bag, not far from the terminal where he'd tried to undo everything he'd done. The holograms that patrol the Sierra Madre are modeled after Vera, playing her final recorded words on a loop, a distress call to Sinclair that he never got to hear, still broadcasting more than 2 centuries later. Ian and Cheryl Orwell. Orwell Orchards had been failing for years before the bombs dropped, and Ian Orwell knew it. He'd been denied loans from the Charleston Bank multiple times, the crop was failing, and he'd gone into debt building something he hadn't even told his wife about, a shelter underneath the farm. When the bombs fell, he got Cheryl inside and sealed the door. The terminal entries you find inside the shelter tell the rest of the story. Christmas 2077, things were still manageable. Ian surprised Cheryl with a baby crib he'd bought before everything collapsed, and they decided they'd try to start a family. By March 2078, no luck, and the equipment was starting to fail. The pool pump, the fusion generator, one of the projectors. By September of that year, Ian was losing hair and couldn't keep weight on, and Cheryl was telling him they needed to find help because the shelter was making him sick. But he refused to leave. The last entry is harder to read. Ian's writing is visibly deteriorating, short sentences foggy, but the intent is clear enough. Cheryl wanted out, and Ian decided she wasn't allowed to leave, so he locked her in the supply room, which he called keeping her safe. What he didn't account for was that Cheryl repaired the exit button on the door, waited until she could hear him in the shower, took the key and walked out. She left a note addressed to anyone who might find it, saying she still loved him. Ian's skeleton is in the shower. That's where he was when she left. The Keller family. The Keller family didn't have a great relationship before the bombs dropped, and the 5 holotapes they left scattered across the Capitol wasteland make that pretty clear. Alex Keller was a National Guardsman who managed to steal the access code to a secure underground bunker inside the National Guard depot, and then got arrested for it. But before they took him in, he did something either very clever or very manipulative depending on how you read it. He split the 4-digit code and sent one number to each family member, which meant they'd all have to be in the same place to get inside. You find the tapes spread across the wasteland, a pylon shack, a cemetery, a roadside diner, a sniper shack, a camp near the Anchorage Memorial, and pieced together a family that clearly had unresolved things between them. Alex sent each of them one digit of the code. Tina got 5, the day of her birth. Ralph's tape is the one that stays with you. He sent his number ahead to his sister, 6, told her she could have it, said he had a mushroom cloud to walk into, wished everyone a happy Holocaust, and that was that. The other 4 made it to the bunker without him. When you finally get inside, there are 3 bodies and a glowing one. The working theory being that the father had been making trips outside into the irradiated wasteland, looking for supplies, accumulated enough exposure to turn, and either killed the others or simply outlived them. Nobody left a note explaining it. Alex, who made the whole thing possible, never made it in at all. Tom McMullen. The pit's supply plant terminal entries aren't easy to find, but when you do, they tell the story of a man who spent months trying to protect people who ended up blaming him for everything anyway. Tom McMullen was the plant supervisor, and when management started bringing in Protectrons to replace the human workforce, he stalled them. Told management the robots weren't performing to standards when they clearly were, delayed shipments, bought the workers time he knew was borrowed. Management eventually made a surprise visit, saw the robots working perfectly, caught 2 employees dismantling one with the sledgehammer, and that was the end of it. They announced the plant would be vacated by 1 p.m. The workers decided McMullen had been helping management all along to save his own job. He grabbed his pistol and ran for the exit. It was already barricaded. He made it to a supply closet and locked the door, figuring he'd wait until they left. They didn't leave. They stood outside and waited for him to come out, and he could hear them through the door. Then the Protectrons arrived. McMullen opened the door once, just long enough to see a laser take off one of the workers' arms. Then he went back inside and didn't open it again, sitting there while the screaming in the hallway ran its course and eventually went quiet. The last entry ends with him saying, "Whoever reads this should know he did everything he could to keep these men employed, and that this should serve as an example of how not to replace humans with machines." His skeleton is in the closet. He never came out. The McClellan family. There's a townhouse in Georgetown with an unlocked front door and a dormant Mr. Handy sitting inside, and nothing in the building tells you what happened to the family who lived there. What you get instead is a terminal with a list of household chores you can assign the robot. Walk Muffy, pick up the grocery order, read the children a bedtime poem. So you pick one, and then you watch. If you tell him to walk the dog, the Mr. Handy goes to the backyard and stands over Muffy's remains, trying to coax a corpse that has been there for 2 centuries into standing up. If you tell him to read the children a poem, he walks to the bedroom and recites Sarah Teasdale's "There Will Come Soft Rains" to 2 small skeletons in a bunk bed, one of them still holding a teddy bear. The poem is about a world that keeps going after mankind is gone. Birds and frogs and soft rain, none of it noticing or caring that we aren't there anymore. It was written in 1920. Ray Bradbury later used it as the title of a short story about a house whose automated systems keep running long after a nuclear war, not knowing the family inside is dead. The Mr. Handy finishes the poem and goes back to his pad. The Miller family. If you extend the satellites at Relay Tower OSC527, you'll pick up a radio signal coming from somewhere called Big John Salvage. It's a man's voice, clearly panicked, explaining that his family is trapped in their shelter. The generator running the ventilation has died. The hatch was sealed vacuum tight when it lost power and won't open from inside. He explains where the hatch is, in a tipped train car in the junkyard, and asks anyone listening to please start the generator, because they're almost out of oxygen. Then he stops mid-sentence to talk to someone named Kimmy, telling her to stay calm and breathe slowly. Then the message repeats. When you find the shelter and get the hatch open, there's nobody inside waiting to be rescued. The broadcast is pre-recorded, which means at some point John Miller sat down, recorded a distress call, set it to loop, and that was the last thing he could do for his family. Whether anyone came in time is a question the game doesn't answer. The signal is still broadcasting.